If you're a lifelong learner listening to this right now, you've probably heard all the standard metaphors for how your body
Right,
works.
the classic analogies.
Yeah,
Oh.
exactly. Like we talk about the fight or flight response as if it's just this, I don't know, this simple primitive alarm bell ringing in your head.
Like a fire alarm.
Right. And we talk about the gut brain connection like it's a couple of tin cans connected by a string, maybe just sending a message that you ate way too much pizza.
Which is, frankly, a massive underestimation of what's actually happening.
It really is. So today we are going to take that conventional biology textbook, the one that treats the human nervous system like this simple electrical grid of wires and plumbing and, chemical soups, and we are going to completely shatter it.
It's long overdue for a shattering,
I
honestly.
totally agree.
I mean, we've been clinging to this 19th century classical mechanics view of how we tick. We look at nerves like they're just copper wires and neurotransmitters like they're mail carriers.
Yeah, dropping off little chemical packages.
Exactly. And while that model, it gets you through high school biology,
Mm.
it is absolutely holding us back from understanding the true, frankly, mind-bending nature of our biology.
Okay, let's unpack this because our mission for today's deep dive is pretty ambitious.
Extremely ambitious.
Yeah. We are setting out to map the autonomic nervous system. So that includes the sympathetic system, the parasympathetic system, the enteric system down in your gut, and that massive vagus nerve connecting it all.
The whole network.
Right. But we aren't just looking at the macroscopic anatomy here or the biology or even how they drive your psychology and metabolism. We are taking the elevator all the way down.
Down to the absolute basement.
Past the organs, past the cells, past the molecules. We're plunging all the way into the subatomic realm to understand these systems through the lens of quantum physics and quantum mechanics.
Which is where things get truly weird.
That's so weird. But we're going to build up to it, right? We're starting at the macro level, the flesh and the nerves moving into that chemical layer and ultimately shrinking down to the quantum scale, where the very fabric of reality governs our biology.
It's a profound journey and, well, a controversial one in some circles.
Oh, for sure.
Because for decades, the absolute analytical consensus in neuroscience was that the brain and the nervous system were just far too warm and wet to support delicate quantum phenomena.
Right. They thought the brain was too messy.
Exactly. We thought quantum mechanics only belonged in, like, absolute zero laboratories or out in the vacuum of deep space.
Not inside a 98-degree human body.
Right. But the new science of quantum biology reveals something entirely different. Our nervous system might not just be a biological machine, it might actually be a massive, perfectly calibrated quantum computational network.
It's wild to even think about. And I want to ground this before we get too deep, before we can understand how quantum tunneling fires a nerve. We have to map the physical hardware first.
We need the blueprint.
Exactly. We need to know what systems we are actually talking about, where they live in your body, and what they do. So let's start with the sympathetic nervous system, the SNS. The architecture here is incredibly specific, isn't it?
Very specific. The sympathetic nervous system originates in what we call the thoracolumbar outflow.
Thoracolumbar outflow. Okay, walk us through what that actually looks like.
So to visualize this, just think about your spinal cord. The cell bodies of these presynaptic neurons, basically the starting points of the signal, they're located in a very particular region called the intermediolateral nucleus.
Okay.
And this is basically a column of gray matter tucked right inside the spinal cord, stretching from your first thoracic vertebra, which is right around the base of your neck, down to your second lumbar vertebra in your lower mid-back.
So it's the centralized command strip running right down the middle of your back.
Yes.
And from there, the signals have to actually get out to the organs, right? Because the spine itself isn't touching your heart or your lungs.
Right, they have to travel out, and they use a very complex relay system to get there.
Mm-hmm.
The connections run outward from that spinal column, and they hit two main sets of ganglia.
And ganglia are
Think of ganglia as biological substations or relay hubs.
like a power relay.
Exactly. So first you have the paravertebral ganglia. These form the sympathetic trunk, which is essentially a twin chain of nerve hubs running bilaterally right alongside your spine on either side.
Wow, okay.
Then the signals push further out to the prevertebral ganglia. These are midline structures located much deeper in your torso, sitting right in front of the aorta.
So deeper in the body.
Yeah, like the celiac ganglia, for instance, which handles the signals going straight to your digestive tract.
Okay, and biologically, this network is the classic fight-or-flight system. When a threat appears, say, a car swerves into your lane on the highway, this system activates.
Almost instantly.
Right. It triggers the adrenal medulla sitting on top of your kidneys to release an absolute flood of epinephrine and norepinephrine. And when I was looking through the source material for this, I kept trying to find a better way to visualize this than the old gas pedal metaphor.
Yeah, the gas pedal analogy is a bit weak.
Because a gas pedal just makes you go faster. The sympathetic nervous system is more like, I don't know, a city's power grid during a catastrophic hurricane. It is a massive, instantaneous reallocation of resources.
It is a much more accurate way to look at it. It's a total emergency resource diversion.
Right, because when that car swerves into your lane, the sympathetic system instantly dilates your pupils so you can take in more visual data.
It spikes your heart rate.
Yeah, it expands your airways to pump massive amounts of oxygen to your muscles. But at the exact same time, it slams the door on residential power. It instantly pauses digestion and kidney function.
It has to.
Because the body literally says, we don't need to digest that sandwich right now. We need every millivolt of energy to turn the steering wheel and survive this crash.
And the receptor systems mediating these responses, the alpha and beta adrenergic receptors, they execute this diversion incredibly fast.
Just split-second timing.
But a city cannot run in emergency hurricane mode forever.
No, the grid would completely melt down.
Exactly. You need a system to restore normal operations, repair the damage, and bring the residential zones back online. And that brings us to the parasympathetic nervous system, the PNS, and its primary biological cable, the vagus nerve.
Right, the rest and repair counterpart to our emergency override.
Yes.
Yes.
And geographically, it's positioned entirely differently from the sympathetic system.
Because the sympathetic was right in the middle of the back.
Right. While the sympathetic system originates in the middle of your spine, the parasympathetic system flanks it. It originates at the very top and the very bottom of your central nervous system.
Oh, interesting.
It comes from the cranial nerves inside the brainstem
Yeah.
and from the sacral spinal cord at the very base of your spine near your tailbone.
So it's capping it on both ends.
Exactly. Its biological mandate is to maintain homeostasis, and its primary chemical messenger is acetylcholine rather than adrenaline.
Okay, acetylcholine.
And the undisputed star of this system is the vagus nerve, which is cranial nerve 10.
This thing is an anatomical monster, honestly. I was reading that it wanders through the entire body, which I guess is where the name comes from, right? Vagus, like vagabond?
That is the exact Latin
Yeah.
root, yes. Wandering. It is a bidirectional superhighway.
Bidirectional, so two-way traffic.
Right. It connects the brainstem, specifically an incredibly important area called the nucleus of the tractus solitarius, to almost all of your body's internal organs.
Just weaving through everything.
It reaches down to regulate the pacemaker cells in your heart, the smooth muscle of your respiratory tract, your liver, your gallbladder, your stomach, and your intestines.
Wow.
It's carrying sensory information up to the brain and motor commands down to the organs continuously.
Which brings up something I really want to clarify for everyone listening, because I think it's important. How do these sympathetic and parasympathetic systems actually coordinate?
That's a great question.
Because it is so easy to think of them as an on and off switch. Like, oh, I'm stressed, so my sympathetic system is on. I'm relaxing on the couch, so my parasympathetic system is on. But reading the physiology, that is totally wrong.
It is a profound misconception. It is not a light switch at all. It is a dynamic moment-to-moment modulation.
Like a blending of the two.
Exactly. They are constantly engaged in a biological tug of war, literally breathing life into your homeostasis. Take a really mundane example, like lying in bed and then just standing up to get a glass of water.
Right, a completely non-threatening event. No car swerving into your lane.
Entirely non-threatening. But when you stand, gravity instantly tries to pull all your blood down into your legs.
I was sure.
If nothing intervened, your blood pressure in your brain would drop precipitously and you would black out on your bedroom floor.
Just from standing up.
Just from standing up. To prevent this, your sympathetic nervous system instantly fires. It causes the smooth muscles around your blood vessels to constrict, shooting the blood back up to your brain.
But wait, if the sympathetic system is firing, doesn't that make your heart race?
Exactly. If the sympathetic system did that unchecked, your heart rate would spike dangerously high. So at the exact same millisecond, your parasympathetic system, via the vagus nerve, modulates the pacemaker cells of the heart.
Oh, wow.
It pulls the reins back just enough so your heart rate remains stable while your blood pressure adjusts.
That's incredible.
This highly choreographed dance between the two systems shifts continuously, breath by breath, heartbeat by heartbeat.
That is just stunning. It's like having a million microscopic air traffic controllers keeping your body upright.
It's a very busy airspace.
Yeah. But we can't fully map the autonomic system without talking about the third component. And this is the one that I think completely shatters people's understanding of their own bodies.
The enteric nervous system.
Yes. The enteric nervous system, the ENS, the so-called second brain.
The ENS is an absolute marvel of anatomy. I mean, it is a sprawling, diverse network of afferent and efferent neurons embedded directly in the muscular wall of your entire gastrointestinal tract.
A whole thing.
From your esophagus all the way down to your rectum. We're talking about over 100 million neurons.
I really need you listening in your car or wherever to pause and think about that. Over 100 million neurons. That is roughly the same number of neurons as you have in your entire spinal cord, or like the brain of a small mammal just wrapped around your intestines.
It is a massive neural network.
So how is it structured?
Structurally, it is split into two main plexuses. First is the myenteric plexus, which is also known as Auerbach's plexus.
Auerbach's plexus, okay.
Right. This network sits nestled between the longitudinal and circular muscle layers of the gut, and it primarily controls gastrointestinal motility.
Like moving the food.
Yes, it is responsible for peristalsis, the complex, wave-like physical contractions that push food through the digestive tract.
Okay, and the second one?
The second network is the submucosal plexus, or Meissner's plexus. This one sits much closer to the inner lining of the gut and controls fluid secretions, absorption, and local blood flow.
And the craziest part about this massive neural network in our gut is its autonomy.
Unprecedented autonomy.
Yeah, because the brain in our head likes to think it is in charge of everything, but the enteric system really doesn't care what the central nervous system thinks.
What's truly fascinating here is the sheer degree of its independence.
Yeah.
The ENS contains hardwired localized reflex circuits. Now, it is heavily modulated by the central nervous system. The vagus nerve and the sympathetic fibers absolutely send its signals.
Right, they talk to each other.
But it does not strictly need them to function.
Wait, really?
Really?
Yeah.
If you were to completely sever the enteric nervous system from the central nervous system, those hardwired circuits in the gut wall would continue to regulate peristalsis, balance electrolytes, and manage digestion all on their own.
That is wild.
It is a completely independent command center operating entirely inside your abdomen.
Okay, so we have laid out the macroscopic hardware. We've got the sympathetic emergency grid, the parasympathetic vagal repair highway, and this autonomous 100 million neuron supercomputer running our gut.
That's the wiring.
That is the wiring, but highways are totally useless without traffic. What kind of chemical cargo is actually driving on these roads to make us feel stressed or anxious or happy?
Because the physical hardware dictates the chemical software.
Exactly. The physical dictates the chemical of our daily experience. So let's dig into the psychological interactions, starting with the sympathetic system and stress.
Right. So when you encounter a stressor, your brain initiates a profound psychophysiological response. The sympathetic system activates, and the parasympathetic vagal tone withdraws.
The tug-of-war shifts.
Exactly. And this creates a state known as allostasis.
Allostasis. Okay, how is that different from homeostasis?
Well, homeostasis is about keeping things the same, like keeping your body temperature at exactly 98.6 degrees. Allostasis is your body anticipating a future need and actively changing its set points to meet it.
So allostasis is your body realizing winter is coming and preemptively storing fat, or realizing a deadline is coming and preemptively spiking your alertness.
Precisely. It is a heightened functional state meant to help you survive a temporary challenge.
Temporary being the key word.
Exactly. Because modern life doesn't always offer temporary challenges. When we face chronic psychological stress, financial worries, toxic relationships, endless work pressure, the HPA axis becomes continuously engaged.
The HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis.
Right.
This is the mechanism that eventually dumps cortisol into our blood. Let's walk through how that actually works, because it's not just a single switch being flipped in the brain.
No, it is a cascading chemical sequence. The hypothalamus in your brain senses the chronic threat first. It secretes a hormone called corticotropin-releasing factor, or CRF.
Okay, CRF.
This travels a tiny distance to the pituitary gland, which then releases adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH, into your general bloodstream.
And that travels all the way down
to your kidneys. When the ACTH reaches your adrenal glands, it prompts them to release cortisol.
Now, in the short term, cortisol isn't bad, right? I mean, it's brilliant. It mobilizes glucose, suppresses non-essential inflammation, keeps you alert.
It's vital for survival. But Chronically elevated cortisol is toxic. It sustains something in the clinical literature called sickness behavior.
Sickness behavior? That sounds like a vicious feedback loop.
It is precisely a loop. Chronic stress keeps cortisol high. Persistently high cortisol physically damages the hippocampus.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and the hippocampus is the part of the brain that normally tells the hypothalamus to shut off the stress response.
So you're breaking the off switch.
You're burning out the brakes. So the physiological regulation breaks down. You stay anxious, which keeps the cortisol high, which further damages the regulation.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. You see this vividly in panic attacks. A panic attack is an extreme, localized sympathetic activation, heavily accompanied by the release of something called neuropeptide Y.
Neuropeptide Y, what does that do?
This causes prolonged, intense vasoconstriction. The blood vessels clamp down hard, which is why people having panic attacks often feel severe chest pain or numbness in their extremities.
It's physical pain from a psychological trigger.
Exactly. The psychological fear literally becomes agonizing physical distress.
So our sympathetic hardware is manufacturing our stress. But what about the enteric nervous system? If my gut has 100 million neurons, what is it manufacturing? Because I've always thought of my stomach as just a giant bag of acid dissolving my lunch.
That view of the gut is entirely obsolete. The enteric nervous system is one of the most prolific chemical factories in the human body.
Really?
Yes. The gut produces over 30 different neurotransmitters.
Over 30?
Over 30. And to put that in perspective, more than 90% of your body's total serotonin and roughly 50% of your body's dopamine reside in the enteric nervous system.
I really need you listening, whether you're at the gym or making dinner right now, to let that sink in.
It's a staggering statistic.
It changes everything. We culturally think of serotonin and dopamine as brain chemicals. We take SSRIs to keep serotonin in our brain synapses. We think of mental health as something that happens entirely inside our skulls.
Between your ears.
Right. But what we consider mental health is, by sheer biological volume, largely manufactured in our intestines.
It completely upends the traditional psychiatric model. If you are experiencing treatment-resistant depression, and your doctor is only looking at your skull, they are ignoring the factory that produces 90% of the relevant neurotransmitters.
That is unbelievable.
And it goes even deeper than that when you introduce the microbiome into this equation.
The trillions of non-human bacteria living inside us.
Yes. The gut microbiota strains like Bifidobacterium and Lactobacillus, they are not just passive passengers eating our leftovers.
Right, they aren't just hitching a ride.
No, they're engaging in active microbial endocrinology. These bacteria actually synthesize neurotransmitters themselves.
The bacteria make them.
They do. They produce gamma-aminobutyric acid, or GABA, which is your body's primary inhibitory calming neurotransmitter. They produce short-chain fatty acids, and they even synthesize dopamine.
So you're telling me non-human bacteria are manufacturing the chemicals that dictate human emotion?
Yes, and they communicate those chemicals directly to the intrinsic neural networks of your enteric nervous system.
Wow.
This is why dysbiosis and imbalance in these bacterial colonies is now anatomically and biologically linked to major depression, severe anxiety, and even autism spectrum disorders.
Because the chemical factory is off balance.
Exactly. The bacteria produce the neurochemicals. Those chemicals stimulate the 100 million neurons of the enteric nervous system, and the ENS fires those signals directly up that vagal superhighway straight into the brainstem. Your gut bacteria are literally dialing up your brain and dictating your mood.
That is incredible. The physical hardware in our gut is powering our psychological software. But, and this is where my mind goes next, generating all these neurotransmitters, running the HPA axis, managing the sympathetic emergency grid, this has to require an immense amount of physical energy.
It is extremely metabolically demanding.
So how does the nervous system actually power this emotional roller coaster?
This is where we have to shift our focus to the metabolic interactions. The key concept here is metabolic flexibility.
Metabolic flexibility.
Right. Your nervous system cannot function if your cells cannot get fuel. Metabolic flexibility is your body's ability to seamlessly switch fuel sources, primarily transitioning from burning stored fats to burning available carbohydrates depending on what the nervous system demands in that exact millisecond.
Right, because if that car swerves into my lane and my sympathetic nervous system hits the hurricane emergency switch, I don't have time to slowly metabolize a fat cell.
Not at all.
I need explosive, instant energy.
Exactly. So when the sympathetic nervous system activates, it directly innervates the liver. It forces the liver to rapidly break down stored glycogen and dump massive amounts of glucose straight into your bloodstream for instant cellular fuel.
Wow.
It also activates brown adipose tissue, a highly specialized type of fat, to generate rapid heat through a process called non-shivering thermogenesis.
So the nervous system is heavily dictating peripheral metabolism.
It is.
Ugh.
But it is a two-way street. The brain itself is intimately involved in and vulnerable to metabolic regulation. We now understand that the brain is an insulin-responsive organ.
Which is relatively new science, right? Because for decades, if you said the word insulin, everyone just thought of muscles, fat, and diabetes.
We absolutely did.
Right.
But we now know the insulin receptor is broadly expressed throughout the central nervous system, particularly in the hypothalamus, the hippocampus, and the cerebral cortex.
What is it doing up there?
Well, insulin in the brain regulates feeding behavior, it modulates memory formation, and it heavily impacts mood.
So it's not just about sugar processing.
No, it's foundational to cognition. So if you develop central nervous system insulin resistance, where the neurons stop responding properly to insulin signals, it doesn't just mean your blood sugar is slightly off.
Right.
It directly impairs your body weight regulation, your ability to form memories, and your emotional stability.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it implies something massive about mental health. Emotional dysregulation, anxiety, depression, often these aren't just purely psychological failings.
They rarely are.
It is quite literally metabolic failure of your cells. The nervous system is trying to do incredibly complex psychological work on a low or completely unstable energy supply.
That is precisely it.
It's like trying to run a high-end supercomputer, trying to render a massive 3D video, but you are running it on a dying battery with a frayed power cord.
Yes.
The software starts glitching, the screen freezes, not because the code is bad, but because the foundational power supply is erratic.
A perfect analogy. If the mitochondria in your neurons can't flexibly transition fuel sources because of insulin resistance, the psychological software crashes.
Right.
And that, honestly, brings us to the absolute edge of classical biology. We have traced the nerve wiring, we have mapped the neurotransmitter factories in the gut, and we have looked at the metabolic fuel that powers it all. But classical physics and classical chemistry eventually hit a brick wall.
They do, because we can talk about neurotransmitters and cortisol all day, but if mood and metabolism are just chemicals, what actually triggers the chemicals?
What is the first domino?
Exactly. To understand the root cause of a thought or an action, we have to zoom in past the organ, past the cell, past the molecular chemistry. We have to look at the subatomic physics of a nerve firing.
And this is where classical physics fails to fully account for the sheer speed, the extreme energetic efficiency, and the precise causal mechanisms of consciousness and voluntary action in the brain.
Because it's just too slow.
Exactly. If we rely solely on classical chemical diffusion, the idea that molecules just sort of float randomly across a synapse until they happen to hit a receptor, the math simply does not work out.
It's just random chance at that point.
Right. It is too slow, it is too noisy, and it doesn't account for the unified nature of conscious thought. To understand the mind-brain connection at its most fundamental level, we have to leave classical mechanics behind and turn to quantum theory.
Okay, here we go.
Specifically, the framework laid out by John von Neumann, one of the greatest mathematicians of the 20th century. Von Neumann's formulation of quantum mechanics mathematically necessitates the inclusion of the observer's conscious brain into the physical equation of reality.
So what does this all mean for us functionally? When I decide to move my hand or when I feel a sudden wave of anxiety from my gut, how does a conscious thought actually turn into a physical nerve firing?
To answer that mechanically, we turn to a brilliant model proposed by theoretical physicist Friedrich Beck and the Nobel laureate neuroscientist Sir John Carew-Eccles.
The Beck-Eccles model.
Yes. They spent years analyzing the subatomic physics of synaptic communication. Let's visualize a synapse, the tiny gap between two neurons.
Got it.
For a nerve to fire and communicate its signal, it has to release a neurotransmitter like dopamine or acetylcholine across that gap.
Right, sending the mail carrier across the street.
Exactly. These neurotransmitters are stored inside the nerve ending in microscopic bubbles called synaptic vesicles. For the chemical to be released, the bubble has to fuse with the cell wall and dump its contents outward.
Which is exocytosis.
That process is called exocytosis,
Right.
and it is mechanically governed by a highly specific protein structure known as the snare complex.
I was actually reading about the snare complex in the notes for this deep dive. I pictured it like a zip tie or maybe a complex physical lock on a gate that holds the neurotransmitter bubbles back.
That is a very good visualization. It is a bundle of coiled proteins holding the vesicle firmly in place. Now, classically, Biologists thought that when calcium ions rushed into the cell, random thermal noise, just the chaotic heat of the body, sort of vibrated and knocked these protein locks open.
Just jiggled the lock until it broke.
Right. But Beck and Eccles, and later quantum biologists who expanded on their work, realized random heat isn't precise enough. They proposed a quantum mechanical trigger. They identified the crucial role of something called Davidoff solitons.
Okay, I hit this term in the source material and my brain just broke a little bit.
It's a dense concept.
What exactly is a Davidoff soliton? Because it's not a physical particle like an electron, right?
No, it is a quantum quasi-particle. Think of it as a highly stable, localized wave of vibrational energy.
A wave of energy.
Right. It is an energy packet that acts like a particle, and it travels down the protein alpha helices without losing its shape or its energy. According to the quantum biological model, these Davidoff solitons are what actually trigger the release of your neurotransmitters.
And how do they do that?
By undergoing quantum tunneling.
Quantum tunneling. Okay, for you listening, this is where the science fiction becomes biological fact.
It really does.
Quantum tunneling is this phenomenon where a subatomic particle passes through a solid physical energy barrier that, according to classical physics, it absolutely does not have the energy to cross.
It mathematically shouldn't happen.
It is literally like throwing a tennis ball at a 10-foot thick brick wall, and instead of bouncing off, the ball just phases right through the wall and appears on the other side.
That is exactly what is happening inside your brain right now. The Davidoff soliton tunnels through a potential energy barrier in the synapse.
It just ghosts right through.
Yes. By instantaneously phasing through that barrier, the soliton transfers a precise packet of energy that physically twists the protein alpha helices. It zips the snare complex together, forcing the vesicle to fuse with the membrane. That subatomic quantum tunneling event is what triggers the macroscopic release of neurotransmitters. A quantum ghost passing through a wall is the fundamental mechanism of your conscious action.
Stop right there. I have to push back here because this is the exact moment where conventional neurobiologists usually throw up their hands and leave the room.
They absolutely do.
You are telling me that a 98.6-degree human brain is sustaining quantum coherence because physicists spend billions of dollars building massive, super-cooled computers, bringing them down to absolute zero just to get a few qubits to hold a quantum state for a fraction of a second without collapsing.
Yes, the decoherence problem.
Right. How on earth can quantum tunneling happen in a warm, wet, chaotic human brain? Doesn't the chaotic thermal energy, what they call decoherence, destroy delicate quantum states instantly?
It is the most common and historically the most valid pushback against quantum neuroscience.
Because it sounds impossible.
It did. For a long time, physicists firmly believed quantum coherence could only exist in a pristine vacuum at absolute zero. But this is exactly where the revolutionary field of quantum biology has overturned the consensus.
Also,
We now have undeniable proof that biological systems have actually evolved specifically to harness, protect, and sustain these fragile quantum states right at room temperature.
and the classic example of this is photosynthesis, right?
Yes, photosynthesis is the perfect parallel. For a long time, scientists couldn't figure out why plant photosynthesis was so impossibly efficient. When a photon of sunlight hits a leaf, that energy is transferred to a reaction center with near 100% efficiency.
No energy lost at all.
Almost none. Classical physics couldn't explain it. The energy should have been lost as heat bouncing around the cell.
Right.
We now know that it happens because the energy travels in a state of quantum superposition.
Wait, it travels in superposition.
Yes, it takes every possible path through the leaf simultaneously, tests them all, and collapses into the single most efficient route.
That is insane.
If a warm, wet, chaotic green leaf sitting in a summer breeze can maintain quantum coherence to harvest light, it is not only possible but highly probable that the exquisitely structured, highly evolved biological architectures of our nervous system use those exact same quantum rules to process information.
That is just, it is a total paradigm shift.
Completely.
So you listening, sitting in your car or walking your dog right now, every time you decide to move your arm or take a breath, you are triggering millions of microscopic quantum tunneling events. You're literally warping subatomic reality just to lift a coffee cup.
It sounds like magic, but it's biology.
But this leads to a massive problem.
It's a synchronization problem.
Yeah. If individual synapses are firing via isolated, localized quantum tunneling, how does the entire nervous system synchronize? How do billions of isolated quantum events in my gut, my spine, and my brain stitch themselves together to create a unified, continuous feeling of being me?
This brings us to the holy grail of this deep dive. This is the exact question that led to one of the most controversial but increasingly supported theories in modern neuroscience.
Let's hear it.
It's called orchestrated objective reduction, or ORCH. Or.
This theory was developed in the 1990s by a really fascinating duo, the eminent mathematical physicist Sir Roger Penrose, who actually won the Nobel Prize for his work on black holes, and a clinical anesthesiologist named Dr. Stuart Hameroff.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because they didn't look at the synapses. They looked deeper at something called microtubules.
Exactly. Inside our neurons, and we were talking about neurons across the entire central nervous system, the sympathetic ganglia, the parasympathetic vagus, and the enteric system in the gut, there are structural cytoskeletal tubes called microtubules.
Okay, what are they made of?
They are tiny, hollow cylinders composed of proteins called tubulin. Now, for decades, biologists thought microtubules were just the dumb scaffolding of the cell.
Like the framework. Right. They thought they were literally just the microscopic 2x4s and steel girders holding the physical shape of the neuron together.
Just structural. But Orko-Jar says they are much more than biological 2x4s.
Profoundly more. Penrose and Hameroff proposed that these microtubules act as literal quantum computational structures.
How?
Because of their unique lattice structure. The tubulin proteins can exist in multiple quantum states simultaneously, a true state of quantum superposition. Their states evolve according to the Schrödinger equation.
Wait, the actual Schrödinger equation inside our cells?
Yes. Your brain is not a classical computer made of meat. It is a massive biological quantum computer.
But a superposition can't last forever, right? The wave function, this realm of all possibilities, has to eventually collapse into a single physical reality.
Correct. And this is where Penrose's genius in the physics of gravity comes in.
Gravity.
Yes, gravity. Penrose proposed that this quantum superposition inside the microtubules grows and builds until it reaches a specific, mathematically designed gravitational energy threshold.
A gravitational threshold inside the brain.
It is literally a microscopic difference in the geometry of space-time itself.
Wow.
When the superposition hits that exact limit, it becomes unstable and triggers an objective reduction or a sudden collapse of the wave function into one definite state.
And what does that collapse actually mean for us?
According to the ORCH-OR theory, the synchronized, orchestrated collapse of the wave function across billions of microtubules is what constitutes a single moment of conscious experience.
Wait.
Consciousness is not a continuous stream. It is a rapid-fire sequence of these orchestrated quantum wave collapses happening millions of times a second.
That is staggering. Our consciousness is literally the rhythmic collapsing of quantum possibilities into physical reality.
Millions of times a second.
But going back to my skepticism from earlier, how do these microtubules maintain this quantum state? You mentioned the photosynthesis analogy, but how specifically do our neurons beat the warm and wet problem across the entire nervous system?
Through a remarkable biological phenomenon called superradiance and symmetry-enhanced coherence.
Superradiance.
Right. Recent quantum biological studies have demonstrated that within these microtubules, there are highly specific native geometric arrangements of tryptophan chromophores.
Tryptophan, like the amino acid in turkey that makes you sleepy?
The very same molecule, but playing a vastly different role here. Inside the microtubule, these tryptophan molecules form an incredibly dense, highly symmetrical network.
Okay.
This specific geometric symmetry allows for superradiant excitonic states. What that means is the symmetry of the proteins actually protects the delicate quantum state from the thermal noise of the surrounding cell.
It's like a shield.
It acts as a biological shield. It allows for coherent, symmetry-enhanced energy emission over incredibly long distances within the neuron. The biology didn't just stumble into quantum mechanics. It evolved an exquisite geometric shield to protect it.
Okay, to make this concrete for the listener, because this sounds like brilliant, untouchable theoretical physics, is there any empirical, real-world proof of this?
There is.
How do we know these quantum vibrations are actually happening inside a human brain and that they are responsible for consciousness?
The most compelling empirical proof comes from Hameroff's side of the equation, the study of general anesthesia.
Wait, like being put under for surgery?
Exactly. We have known how to put people to sleep for major surgery for over a century. But here is a dirty little secret of modern medicine.
Which is?
Until very recently, classical pharmacology could never fully explain how general anesthetics actually work.
Wait, they don't know how it works.
They knew anesthetics erase consciousness, sure, but they couldn't explain how a gas molecule could just turn off your mind while perfectly leaving your non-conscious autonomic functions like breathing and heart rate completely intact.
I never thought about that. You're unconscious but still breathing perfectly.
Right. The Orr theory made a bold prediction years ago. It predicted that anesthetics must work by directly disrupting the quantum coherence within the microtubule.
So they tested it.
They tested it, and the results are sending shockwaves through science. Recent experiments have shown that general anesthetics, gases like halothane and compounds like anthracene, bind to very specific, tiny hydrophobic pockets within the tubulin proteins of the microtubules.
Okay, and what happens when they bind?
When they bind there, they physically dampen the terahertz frequency quantum vibrations. They literally absorb and shut down the quantum resonance.
Oh my God.
When those quantum vibrations stop, the wave function cannot collapse and consciousness instantly vanishes. The brain keeps breathing, the heart keeps beating, but the quantum computer is unplugged and the lights go out.
That is absolute proof of concept. The anesthetics are physically dampening the quantum coherence.
Exactly.
Okay, we have covered immense ground today. We mapped the macroanatomy, we explored the chemical metabolism, and we have just cracked the quantum mechanics of the brain. Now we have to bring this all full circle.
Back to the autonomic system.
Right. Our mission was to view the autonomic nervous system through this lens. I want to take this ORCHA-R framework and apply it directly back to the physical systems we outlined in Section 1. Let's start with the vagus nerve. If we reevaluate the vagus nerve through the quantum lens, what does it look like?
If we view the vagus nerve classically, as we discussed earlier, it is just a biological copper wire conducting electrical impulses from the gut to the brain.
Right.
But through the quantum lens, the vagus nerve is reframed as a massive bidirectional quantum channel. We know the vagus nerve is densely packed with microtubules.
Okay.
It is highly probable that it relays signals using quantum coherence to instantaneously synchronize the brain, the heart, and the immune system.
Instantaneously.
Yes. For years, doctors have marveled at how stimulating the vagus nerve can suppress systemic, body-wide inflammation almost instantly. Classical chemical diffusion molecules floating through the bloodstream is simply too slow to account for the speed of that anti-inflammatory response.
It wouldn't reach the whole body that fast.
Exactly. But a coherent quantum signal propagating down the vagal microtubules. That explains the sheer speed and efficiency perfectly.
And what about the enteric nervous system? Our 100 million neuron second brain wrapped around the intestines.
Just apply the math.
Right.
With over 100 million neurons and corresponding massive networks of microtubules within every single one of those neurons, the gut's ENS is undoubtedly performing its own massive quantum computations.
I absolutely love this visual. So if the brain in my skull is a quantum supercomputer, the gut isn't just a basic accessory.
Not at all.
It isn't just a secondary relay station waiting for orders. The gut is a massive parallel quantum processor. It is independently computing emotional data, environmental data, and physiological data, and it is natively networked to the mainframe via the vagal fiber optic quantum line.
That is an incredibly accurate way to visualize the architecture. And applying this lens completely reframes how we must view the sympathetic and parasympathetic balance we talked about at the beginning.
The tug of war.
Right. We mentioned how the body shifts from a sympathetic panic state to a parasympathetic rest state, the hurricane grid versus the residential grid. There are new theories emerging in quantum biology suggesting that this global shift relies on quantum entanglement.
Quantum entanglement.
Specifically, entanglement between phosphorus nuclei, which are remarkably abundant in the ATP energy-carrying molecules of our cells.
Okay, quantum entanglement. Einstein famously called this spooky action at a distance, right?
He did.
This is the phenomenon where two particles become energetically connected so that whatever happens to one instantly happens to the other, even if they are physically separated by miles or across the human body.
Precisely the concept. The instantaneous shift across the entire human organism, from SNS panic to PNS rest and digest, may rely entirely on these entangled states.
So it's perfectly synchronized.
Yes. When your brain perceives a threat and that car swerves into your lane, entanglement could ensure near instantaneous global physiological responses, dilating the pupils, racing the heart, halting the digestion, all happening in perfect unison. Classical nerve conduction and chemical diffusion are simply too slow and messy to perfectly coordinate a billion cells instantly. Quantum entanglement provides the biological synchronization mechanism.
This raises an incredibly important question for anyone listening. If our nervous system is fundamentally a quantum network, how does this change how we view disease and healing?
It changes everything. It forces the medical community to ask a much deeper question. How much of what we call metabolic disease, or chronic psychological stress, or clinical depression, is actually a disruption of quantum coherence in our nervous system?
A loss of
Right.
coherence.
If trauma or toxic stress or poor metabolic health disrupts the delicate structural symmetry of our microtubules, we aren't just dealing with a simple chemical imbalance that can be fixed with a pill.
We're dealing with a localized loss of quantum coherence.
Exactly. It implies that mind-body medicine, deep mindfulness, specialized breathing exercises, these might not just be relaxing psychological tools. They might literally be physical practices that restore quantum coherence and superradiant symmetry along the vagal channel.
Wow. Okay. Let's synthesize this incredible journey we have been on today for everyone listening. We started by mapping the physical highways of your body, the sympathetic emergency grid stretching down your spine, the parasympathetic brakes, the massive wandering vagus nerve, and the autonomous 100 million neuron enteric nervous system computing away in your gut.
The physical layer.
Right. We saw how this physical hardware drives your chemical software, how your gut microbes literally manufacture the neurotransmitters that dictate your mood, and how metabolic flexibility and insulin govern your brain's ability to actually run the software without crashing.
The chemical layer.
And then we took the ultimate plunge. We saw how synaptic firing doesn't just rely on heat and chemistry, but on the quantum tunneling of Davidoff solitons acting like subatomic ghosts. We learned that the tiny microtubules in your cells aren't just structural 2x4s.
They're quantum computers.
They are orchestrated quantum computers, shielding themselves with geometric symmetry, rapidly collapsing the wave function of reality to generate the very experience of human consciousness itself, a reality proven by the anesthetics that selectively unplug that quantum computer.
It is a profound paradigm shift. It reveals that we are not just clumsy meat machines driven by random chemical soup.
Yeah.
We are exquisitely highly evolved, perfectly calibrated quantum biological systems. And before we finish our deep dive today, there's one final mind-expanding idea I want to leave you and the listener to mull over.
We've gone from spinal cords to quantum tunneling. I can't even imagine where we go next. Lay it on us.
Well, we established early on that the trillions of non-human bacteria in our gut microbiome actively synthesize the chemical neurotransmitters that interface with our enteric nervous system.
Well, microbial factory.
We also established that our nervous system, including the ENS, operates via quantum coherence and entanglement to generate conscious experience and emotional states.
Okay, I see where this is going.
If we connect these two established facts, it leads to a staggering hypothesis. Does that mean the trillions of non-human bacteria in our microbiome are actively entangled in the quantum computations of our human consciousness?
Oh my God.
Are we at a fundamental subatomic level, a collective hive mind of human host and microbial life, all computing reality together in a shared quantum state?
That is a staggering thought to end on. If our gut bacteria are physically entangled in our quantum neural network, then the whole concept of me or I is an illusion. We are much more than just us. We are a walking, thinking ecosystem. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the very fabric of your biology. As always, keep questioning the textbook, look closer at the world around you, and stay insanely curious.